The fluorescent lights at Bellini's hummed their familiar, tired song at 11 p.m., bathing everything in a sickly yellow that made even the most expensive dishes look cheap. Vivian's feet throbbed inside her battered old sneakers shoes she'd worn for 10 months because new ones weren't in the budget. Not when her mother's chemo cost $4,200 a month, and definitely not when the rent was already 2 months late. She wiped down table 7 for the 3rd time, her hands moving like a machine. The sharp vinegar of the cleaning solution stung her nose, mixing with the garlic and wine that had seeped into her black uniform so deeply no amount of washing could get it out. Around her, the restaurant was thinning out, the last couples finishing their overpriced desserts, their laughter crisp and careless in a way that felt like a foreign language to Vivian. That was when she saw them. Table 12, tucked in the back corner, VIP seating. Jessica had been assigned that table, but she'd had to leave because her kid had a fever, meaning table 12 was now Vivian's. The woman in the booth was breathtaking in the effortless way only people with money, time, and perfect genetics could be. A red Valentino dress, Vivian recognized it from a magazine she'd flipped through in the hospital waiting room, worth more than 6 months of Vivian's pay. Diamonds glittered at her throat, her ears, her wrist. Black hair, sleek as silk, lips red as blood. But it was the man beside her who made Vivian's attention snag. A navy suit cut to perfection. Blonde hair, blue eyes, handsome in that rich frat boy kind of way. The Rolex on his wrist probably cost more than Vivian's apartment, and his hand rested on the woman's hand. Intimate. Possessive. Except the woman wore a wedding ring, and he didn't. Then Vivian heard it, the woman's laugh. Too loud, too sharp, soaked in alcohol and something else. Cruelty. He thinks he's a king. Sitting in his office, counting money and threatening people. Never has time for me. Never touches me the way you touch. Vivian should have walked away, but she always had terrible timing. As she turned, her elbow clipped the water pitcher. Everything happened both slow and fast at once. The pitcher tipped. Water spilled across the crisp white tablecloth, soaked into the breadbasket, and worst of all, splashed straight into the woman's lap. The woman shrieked. A real, furious scream, springing to her feet, her Valentino dress drenched. Idiot! You bitch! Do you know how much this dress cost? Her hand lifted and Vivian flinched, bracing for the slap. But it didn't come. Enough. The voice was low, almost gentle, yet it cut through the woman's rage like a blade through silk. Vivian turned toward it and saw a third man she hadn't noticed hidden in the shadows of the booth. He rose, unfolding with the kind of absolute confidence that belonged to someone who never questioned whether a room would obey him. Vivian's heart stopped. Tall, broad-shouldered. A black suit that made the blonde man's suit look rented. Dark hair dusted with silver at the temples. A square jaw, sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place, steel gray, deep as an abyss, assessing her with an intensity that made her skin go numb. 2 men in black suits appeared from somewhere behind him, bodyguards, Vivian realized. Huge, dangerous. Their eyes scanned the restaurant like they were searching for threats. Natasha, get to the car. Enzo will take you home. The woman Natasha opened her mouth to argue, but one look from him shut her down. She stormed out. The blonde man scrambled after her, pale as paper, and Vivian was left, alone. With the man whose power felt like gravity, he pulled out a wallet and set down crisp $100 bills on the wet table. A lot of them. Vivian counted quickly $1,000. For the inconvenience, he said. Then his gaze found hers and held a beat longer than necessary. And for what you heard. Vivian's mouth went dry. I didn't hear anything. Something like amusement flickered across his face. You're a terrible liar. I'm a professional server, Vivian heard herself say, not sure where the courage came from. I don't hear, I don't see, I don't remember anything that happens at a guest's table. He stepped closer, close enough for Vivian to catch his cologne. Cedar, leather, and something that smelled like danger and dark promises. His presence was like standing too near a live wire. Every cell in her body screamed to back away, but she couldn't move. What's your name? Vivian. Vivian Hayes. He paused, tilting his head as if appraising a painting. Vivian, he repeated, like he was tasting the name. Then he gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Be more careful, Vivian. Accidents can be dangerous. Not a threat. Or maybe it was. He walked away, his bodyguards following 3 steps behind. Vivian stood frozen in her section, water still dripping off the table to the floor, her heart slamming against her ribs. $1,000. More than 2 weeks of her pay. She could cover part of her mom's chemo, buy new shoes, get Ethan a winter coat. Breathe. Just a little. In a city that seemed determined to choke her every day. but something about it felt wrong, like it was payment for something she didn't understand yet. Vivian walked home through the biting Chicago night, 16 blocks. November wind knifed through her thin coat, but she couldn't afford a taxi, and the buses had stopped running. She thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed, about Ethan asleep at Grandma's, unaware their world was about to collapse, about those steel-gray eyes. Accidents can be dangerous. Her phone buzzed as she climbed the stairs to her fourth-floor apartment. Unknown number. Don't spend the money yet. Vivian went rigid, key hovering in the lock. How did someone have her number? How? Another message. Go to sleep, Vivian. Tomorrow everything changes. She should have been terrified. She should have called the police. She should have done anything except what she did, stare at the words until they blurred, then unlock her tiny apartment and sink onto her battered old sofa. Outside the window, Chicago glittered with lights that belonged to other people, other lives. Lives where no one wore the same sneakers for 10 months, counted coins, or wondered if they'd ever be anything more than invisible. Vivian fell asleep with her phone in her hand, and woke up to pounding on the door. Hard, urgent, the kind of pounding that carried bad news. Vivian Hayes? Chicago police. Open up. We're Frand. She opened the door with swollen eyes, still in her restaurant uniform from the night before. 2 officers stood in the hallway, one older, one younger. Both wore the expression of men about to say something no one wanted to hear. We need you to come downtown, the older one said. There's been a death, and you were the last known person outside the household to see her alive. Vivian felt the floor tilt under her feet. Her? Who is she? Natasha Valenti. Wife of Marco Valenti. The officer stared at her. Do you know who Marco Valenti is, Miss Hayes? Vivian shook her head, but the name rang in her skull like an alarm bell. Marco Valenti is the biggest mafia boss in Chicago, and his wife, the woman you spilled water on last night, was found with a bullet in her head. Vivian's world of medical bills and worn-out shoes and endless shifts suddenly became very, very small. And the darkness was coming. Vivian didn't know she'd just stepped into the game of the most powerful people in Chicago. She didn't know the man with steel-gray eyes was about to change her fate forever. And she definitely didn't know the line between heaven and hell was sometimes nothing more than a single kiss. If you want to know how Vivian survives the Chicago underworld, hit like to support me. Share this video with anyone who loves intense drama. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next shocking part. Vivian felt her knees turn to jelly. The biggest mafia boss in Chicago. Those words echoed inside her head like funeral bells, each repetition heavier than the last. The man with steel-cold gray eyes. The man who had stood close enough that she could smell his cologne. The man who had spoken her name as if he were tasting a rare, expensive liquor. Was Marco Valenti, the boss of bosses. Miss Hayes? The older officer stepped forward, his voice no longer gentle. Do you understand what I just said? Vivian swallowed hard. Her throat was dry as sandpaper. I am just a waitress. I spilled water on her dress. That is all that happened. That is all? The younger officer lifted an eyebrow, his skeptical gaze sweeping Vivian from head to toe, from her messy hair to the wrinkled uniform she was still wearing from last night. Mrs. Valenti was shot in the head in her own mansion around 2 o'clock in the morning, and you were one of the last people to see her alive. The $1,000 in Vivian's purse suddenly felt as heavy as stone. She thought about the mysterious messages. Do not spend the money yet. Tomorrow everything will change. Someone knew. Someone had been watching her. And now the woman she had accidentally spilled water on was dead. We need you to come down to the station. The older officer said it, not as an offer, but as an order. There are a few questions that need answers. Vivian wanted to refuse, wanted to shut the door and pretend it was all a nightmare. But she knew she did not have that choice. Not with 2 police officers standing in her doorway with faces that said no was not an answer. Give me 5 minutes to change. Her voice came out weaker than she wanted. They nodded, but they did not leave. Vivian closed the door, pressed her back to the cold wood, and tried to breathe. Her hands trembled as she changed out of her uniform and into old jeans and a gray sweater, something that would not make her look like a murder suspect. She shoved her phone into her back pocket, feeling its weight like a reminder of last night's messages. Who had sent them? Marco Valenti? Or someone who worked for him? And why? She looked in the mirror. The face staring back at her was pale as a ghost. Dark circles heavy under her eyes, lips cracked and dry. 27, but she looked 35. That was the price of working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and worrying about medical bills until she forgot to eat. When Vivian stepped outside, the 2 officers were waiting. They did not put handcuffs on her, and that was the one small comfort. But the way they walked on either side of her, as if she might bolt at any moment, made her feel like a criminal even though she had done nothing wrong. The police car was parked by the curb, the red and blue lights off, but its presence alone was enough to make the neighbors pull back their curtains and stare. Vivian could already imagine the whispers spreading. The poor girl on the 4th floor getting taken away by the police. Must be drugs or something. Or worse. On the way to the station, Vivian stared out the window. Early morning, Chicago looked gray and bitterly cold, the skyscrapers stabbing up into the sky like bony fingers. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital, unaware that her daughter was being taken in for questioning. She thought about Ethan eating breakfast at his grandmother's house, getting ready for school like it was any ordinary day. Their lives kept moving, while hers was falling, straight down, into an abyss she could not see the bottom of. And somewhere in this city, Marco Valenti was waking up too, a boss who had just lost his wife. Would he grieve? Or did those steel gray eyes never learn what grief was? Vivian did not know the answer, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. The 18th District Police Station sat inside an old brick building, the kind of 1970s architecture Chicago never seemed willing to tear down. Vivian stepped through the thick glass doors and immediately felt the weight of the place. The smell of cold coffee, the smell of sweat, and something else, something like despair that had seeped into every wall. They led her to a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, and the 2 officers disappeared through a door with a short instruction that someone would come see her soon. Soon, it turned out, was a very flexible concept here. Vivian sat there for nearly an hour, watching people come and go, listening to phones ring without stopping and the clatter of keyboards. A small television mounted on the wall was playing the morning news, and when the image of a massive mansion appeared on the screen with a line of text scrolling beneath it, Vivian felt her stomach tighten. The wife of Mafia boss Marco Valenti murdered in Gold Coast Mansion. Police investigating. The screen switched to a photo of Natasha Valenti. Not the drunken and cruel version Vivian had seen last night, but a perfect portrait. Natasha smiled in a white evening gown, diamonds glittering, looking like a queen. Then another photo appeared, and Vivian stopped breathing. Marco Valenti. The picture showed him in a black suit at some charity event, his face severe yet frighteningly handsome. Those gray eyes stared straight into the camera, and even though it was only an image on a television, Vivian still felt as if he were looking straight through her. The anchor's voice carried on, talking about the Valenti family empire, about allegations never proven, about the shadow power that ruled half the city of Chicago. Marco Valenti, 36 years old, inherited the empire from his father 12 years ago, believed to control much of the underground activity in the Great Lakes region, never convicted of any crime, despite a decade of FBI surveillance. Vivian swallowed hard. This was the man who had stood less than a single step away from her last night. The man who had looked into her eyes and said her name as if he were staking a claim. The man who had left behind $1,000 and a warning that now sounded like prophecy. Accidents can be dangerous, and his wife was dead, shot in the head, only a few hours after Vivian had accidentally overheard her confessing an affair. A horrible thought flashed through Vivian's mind. Did Marco know? Had he been there, in the darkness of some corner booth, listening to his wife betray him? And if he had, was that why Natasha was now lying in the morgue? Vivian clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms until it hurt. She could not think that. She could not allow herself to think that. She was just a waitress, stuck in the wrong circumstance at the wrong time. She knew nothing. She saw nothing. She remembered nothing. But the $1,000 in her purse said otherwise. And the messages on her phone said otherwise too. Vivian closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing as it grew faster and faster. She thought about her mother, about Ethan, about the life she had been trying to stitch together day by day. She could not let herself be pulled into this world. She could not let herself become a piece on the board in a game played by powerful men. But when a tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair stepped out through the back door and looked straight at her, Vivian knew it was already too late to choose. She had entered the game the moment the pitcher of water spilled onto table 12. The salt and pepper-haired man led Vivian down a long hallway lined with closed doors on both sides, each one with a small glass window that had been covered by a metal shutter. Their footsteps echoed on the worn linoleum, and Vivian felt as if she were walking into the belly of a monster with no way out. At last they stopped in front of a small room, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs facing each other. The fluorescent light above hummed with that familiar sound, the same sound as at Bellini's, and the coincidence made Vivian want to laugh, bitterly. "Sit down, Miss Hayes." The man pointed to the chair across from him, his tone not friendly, but not hostile either. "I am Detective James Harrison. I am in charge of the Natasha Valenti case." Vivian sat, feeling the cold of the metal seep through the thin denim of her jeans. She placed her hands on her thighs to hide the trembling, though she suspected Harrison had already noticed. Men like him were trained to see everything. Harrison opened a thin file on the table, flipped through a few pages as if reviewing, though Vivian was certain he had memorized every detail. Vivian Hayes, 27 years old, waitress at Bellini's for 4 years. Mother is Margaret Hayes, currently being treated for stage 3 lung cancer at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Younger brother, Ethan Hayes, 17 years old, student at Lincoln Park High School. He looked up. His dark brown eyes felt sharp, almost piercing. Financial situation is pretty tight, is it not? Rent 2 months late. Medical debt close to $50,000. Vivian felt heat rush to her face. What does that have to do with the case? It might not. Harrison leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the tabletop. I just want to understand the person I am talking to. A young woman drowning in debt, working herself to the bone to keep her family afloat. And then suddenly she appears at a scene where a wealthy woman is murdered not long after. He paused, letting the silence settle like lead. Tell me about last night. Everything you remember. Vivian drew in a deep breath. She had been preparing for this question the entire hour she had sat outside. I took over table 12 around 11 o'clock at night because my coworker had to leave early. There was a woman and a man sitting there. I came to pour water, and I accidentally spilled the pitcher on her dress. She got very angry, screaming. Then another man showed up and told her to get to the car. He left a tip and they left. That is all. That is all. Harrison lifted one eyebrow. You did not hear anything they were talking about before you came over. Vivian held his gaze, gathering every ounce of strength she had to keep her voice steady. The restaurant was very loud, sir, and I was taught not to listen to a customer's private conversation. Harrison watched her for a long moment, long enough that Vivian could feel sweat starting at the back of her neck. Then he sighed and leaned back. Miss Hayes, I am going to be direct with you. Marco Valenti is dangerous. He looks polished, refined, but underneath he is a cold-blooded monster who has been killing without hesitation for 12 years, and we have not been able to touch him. He leaned forward again, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. We believe Valenti killed his wife because she was having an affair. And if you know anything that could help us drag him into the light, you should say it now, before it is too late. Vivian thought of Natasha's laughter, of the way she had spoken about her husband, of the blonde man with the expensive Rolex. She thought of Marco's steel-cold gray eyes and the warning he had given her. Accidents can be dangerous. And she thought of the $1,000 sitting in her purse, money that could buy her mother's medication for 1 more month. I do not know anything, detective. Her voice came out almost like a whisper. I am just a waitress. Harrison studied her a little longer, then nodded slowly. All right, Miss Hayes, you can go. He slid a business card across the table. But if you remember something, anything at all, call me, day or night. He paused, his expression turning more serious. And Miss Hayes, stay away from Marco Valenti. People around him tend to die young. Vivian left the police station with Detective Harrison's business card tucked neatly into her coat pocket, heavy as a small stone pressing against her chest. She walked home because she did not have money for a taxi, and because she did not want to sit in any kind of vehicle with other people right now. She needed space to breathe, to think, to try to understand what turn her life had taken without her even realizing it. The streets of Chicago at midday were crowded with people, hurrying to lunch or to their next meeting, none of them aware that a young woman was moving among them with a heart weighed down and a secret that could get her killed. When Vivian reached her building, she stopped at the row of mailboxes out of habit. Her box usually held nothing but overdue bills and collection letters, the kind of things she had learned to shove into a drawer without opening, because she already knew there was nothing inside but red numbers. But today, when she opened the old metal box, something different was waiting. A black envelope, not the cheap white kind debt collectors used. This was thick paper, smooth as velvet, the kind Vivian had only seen in movies about rich people. There was no return address, no stamp, only her name written in silver ink in elegant, almost calligraphic handwriting. Vivian Hayes. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were 2 things. The first was a jet black credit card, no numbers on the front, no bank logo, only her name embossed in silver. Vivian Hayes. It was the kind of card she had heard about. Cards for the ultra-wealthy with no preset limit. The kind you could not apply for, only be invited to receive. The second was a small slip of paper, the same material as the envelope, with a few lines written by hand. For the trouble ahead, use it wisely. Someone will contact you. And in the lower corner, 2 initials. Mvrinet. Marco Valenti. Vivian stood there in the damp hallway of the building, holding the black card as if it were a poisonous snake that could bite her at any moment. Her mind spun with hundreds of questions. Why? Why would a mafia boss send her a credit card? Who was she that he would bother? And most of all, what did he want from her? Someone will contact you. The words echoed in Vivian's head like a threat disguised as a promise. She remembered Detective Harrison's warning. People around him tend to die young. She remembered Natasha Valenti with a bullet in her head, and she remembered steel, cold, gray eyes that had looked straight through her last night. Vivian shoved the envelope and the card into her coat pocket and climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment with legs heavy as lead. The moment she closed the door and pressed her back against the cold wood, the phone in her pocket vibrated. Unknown number. Another unknown number. She opened the message, her heart skittering out of rhythm. Did you get the gift yet? Do not throw it away. You will need it sooner than you think. And beneath that, another line. Tonight, 7 o'clock, a car will come to pick you up. Vivian stared at the phone screen until the words blurred in front of her eyes. Tonight, 7 o'clock, a car will come to pick you up. She did not know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it. Just 24 hours ago, she had been an anonymous waitress, worrying about rent and hospital bills. Now she was holding a black credit card with no limit and being summoned by the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. She tossed the phone onto the bed as if it were on fire and began pacing the cramped apartment, trying to put her chaotic thoughts back in order. She could refuse to go. She could pretend she never got the message, lock the door, turn off her phone, and hide in this apartment forever. But the moment the thought formed, she knew how foolish it was. Men like Marco Valenti did not accept no. If she did not come outside, they would come inside, and she did not want to know what would happen after that. The phone rang, loud enough to make Vivian flinch so hard she nearly stumbled. Not a message this time, but a call. An unknown number flashed on the screen, but she knew it was not unknown to the people watching her. She hesitated for a second, then answered. She said nothing. She only waited. Miss Hayes. The voice on the other end was low and rough, carrying the sound of someone who had smoked too many years. I am Salvatore Benedetto. I work for Mr. Valenti. Vivian tightened her grip on the phone. I received the message. Good. There was no surprise in his tone, as if her receiving it had been inevitable. Then you understand that Mr. Valenti wants to see you tonight. I do not think that is a good idea. Vivian tried to keep her voice steady, even as her heart pounded like a war drum. His wife just died. The police are investigating. If I show up at his house, Miss Hayes, Salvatore cut in, his voice still calm, as if he were talking about the weather. This is not an invitation. This is a request. And Mr. Valenti is not used to being refused. Silence stretched. Vivian could hear his steady breathing through the phone, patient as a cat waiting for a mouse to come out of its hole. What if I do not come? She asked it, even though she already knew the answer. Then we will have to pick you up another way. Salvatore's voice did not threaten. It simply stated a fact, and I do not think you want that. I also do not think your mother at Northwestern wants unexpected visitors, or your brother at your grandmother's house on Belmont Street. Vivian's blood turned to ice. They knew. They knew everything about her family, about the people she loved most, and they would not hesitate to use that information. Is that a threat? Her voice came out like a hiss. It is reality, Miss Hayes. Salvatore sighed, and for a moment he sounded like a tired grandfather, explaining something obvious to a stubborn grandchild. Mr. Valenti has no intention of hurting you. If he did, you would not be here to take this call. He only wants to talk, and I suggest you listen to what he has to say. Vivian closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. She had no choice. She had never had a choice since the moment the water pitcher spilled onto table 12. What time? She asked it with a voice that had already accepted its fate. 7 o'clock. The car will be outside your building. Do not be late. Salvatore paused for a beat. And Miss Hayes. Dress nicely. Mr. Valenti appreciates being put together. The call ended before Vivian could reply. She stood there in the silent apartment, looking out the window as Chicago shifted into afternoon, and wondered if this was the last day she would be able to call herself a free woman. At exactly 7 in the evening, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of Vivian's building, just as Salvatore had promised. She stood at the window and looked down, her heart hammering in her chest as a man in a black suit stepped out from the driver's seat and lifted his gaze to her window, as if he knew precisely where she was. Vivian had spent 3 hours getting ready, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she had nothing else to do except worry. She wore the only black dress in her closet, the one she had bought 2 years ago for a job interview that never worked out, and the high heels she had to blow the dust off because it had been so long since she had touched them. In the mirror, she looked like a different version of herself, a version trying to pretend she belonged in a world she had never belonged to. When Vivian stepped outside, the driver already had the back door open for her, without a word. She slid onto the soft leather seat, catching the scent of a new car and a faint trace of cedar from the little fragrance bottle hanging from the rearview mirror. The SUV moved smoothly through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, where old buildings crowded together and trash piled up on the corners. But as they drove farther north, the scenery began to change. Glass skyscrapers, bright and gleaming, replaced cracked brick. Trees were carefully trimmed instead of growing wild. The cars parked along the street were brands Vivian had only ever seen in magazines. Gold Coast, the neighborhood of the richest people in Chicago. The SUV turned onto a private stone-paved drive, tall maple trees on either side shedding yellow leaves into the autumn wind. At the end of the drive, a massive, wrought iron gate with intricate patterns slowly swung open as the vehicle approached, and Vivian saw security cameras pivoting to track them from every angle. Beyond the gate stood a mansion she could only describe as a palace. 3 stories of gray stone, classical European architecture with white columns and curved iron balconies. Dozens of lit windows glowed like watching eyes, and a marble fountain sat in the center of the front courtyard, an angel statue pouring water from a jar. This was where Natasha Valenti had lived, and this was where she had died. The thought sent a shiver through Vivian as she stepped out of the SUV. A man was waiting at the foot of the stairs leading up to the front door, and Vivian recognized him immediately as Salvatore Benedetto, even though she had never seen his face before. He looked exactly like his voice, around 50, with silver hair combed straight back, a lined face that belonged to someone who had lived through too much, and dark brown eyes sharp as a blade, though not entirely cold. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, standing upright with the bearing of a man accustomed to power, even if he did not hold it. "Miss Hayes." Salvatore dipped his head, the familiar rasp in his voice. "Thank you for coming." "As if I had a choice," Vivian answered, making no effort to hide the bitterness. A thin smile flickered across Salvatore's mouth. "Choice is a luxury, Miss Hayes. Not everyone gets to have it." He turned and gestured for her to follow. "Mr. Valenti is waiting in his study. Please, come with me." Vivian climbed the stone steps, feeling the cold seeping through the thin soles of her shoes. The enormous oak doors opened, and she stepped into an entirely different world. A vast foyer with a soaring ceiling painted with hand-done murals. A huge crystal chandelier hung above, spilling warm golden light onto marble floors polished so bright Vivian could see her reflection. Fine art hung on the walls, the kind she had only seen in museums. A curved staircase swept up to the second floor, its wrought iron railing gilded in gold. She was standing inside the home of a Mafia boss, and she was about to meet him. Vivian drew a deep breath and followed Salvatore deeper into the mansion, each step carrying her farther from her old world and closer to a world she did not know whether she could survive. Marco Valenti's study was at the end of a long hallway lined with oil paintings on both walls, each one probably worth more than Vivian's entire apartment. Salvatore stopped at a dark wooden door, knocked twice, short and crisp, then opened it without waiting for an answer. He motioned for Vivian to go in, and she obeyed, feeling as if she were stepping across a threshold between 2 completely different worlds. The room was spacious, with a high ceiling, walls paneled in dark oak, and bookshelves running from floor to ceiling, packed tight with leather-bound volumes. A massive mahogany desk sat near a large window that looked out over the back garden, and behind that desk, with his back to her, stood Marco Valenti. He was facing the window, hands in his pockets, his broad frame a dark silhouette against the Chicago night glittering with lights. She heard the door close behind her and knew Salvatore was gone, leaving her alone with this man, alone with a Mafia boss who had lost his wife less than 24 hours ago. "You are on time," Marco spoke without turning around, his voice low, carrying through the quiet room. "I appreciate punctuality." Vivian did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She stood a few steps from the desk, fists clenched at her sides to hide the shaking. Marco turned slowly, and when his steel, cold gray eyes found her in the warm yellow light of the room, Vivian felt as if someone had poured ice water down her spine. He looked different from last night, more tired, faint shadows under his eyes, the lines of his face drawn tighter. But the power radiating from him had not lessened. If anything, it was denser now, like a wild animal holding back its rage. "Sit." Marco pointed to one of the 2 leather chairs in front of the desk. It was an order, not an invitation. Vivian sat, back straight, not daring to sink into the cushion. Marco moved behind the desk, but he did not sit. Instead, he opened a drawer and took out a brown file folder. He set it on the desk and pushed it toward her. "Open it," he said. Vivian hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached for the folder. When she opened it, her heart seemed to stop. Inside was everything about her life, neatly organized into sections. Her birth certificate, the college transcripts she had abandoned because she could not afford to stay, her mother's medical records, with the diagnosis of stage 3 lung cancer, financial reports showing almost $70,000 in debt from medical bills and overdue rent, photos of Ethan at Lincoln Park High School. There was even a picture of her grandmother watering the plants in the small garden out front. "You investigated me," Vivian said, her voice thick and hoarse. "I know everything about anyone who steps into my life," Marco replied, not a trace of apology in his tone. "Vivian Hayes, 27 years old, born in Chicago. Father left when you were 15. Mother, Margaret Hayes, lung cancer, undergoing chemotherapy at Northwestern Memorial, costing $4,200 a month that you cannot pay. Brother, Ethan, 17, an excellent student, dreams of attending Northwestern University, but you do not have the money for tuition. You work 2 jobs, 80 hours a week, and it is still not enough." Each word felt like a blade, cutting Vivian open, exposing the bare truth of her life, the truth she had tried to hide from the world. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fling the folder in his face, but she only sat there, numb. "Why?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Why do you care about me?" Marco came around the desk and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was much taller, and from this angle he looked like a tower built of shadow and danger. "Because you heard something you were not meant to hear," he said, "and because I need to make a decision about you." "What decision?" Marco went back to the desk, opened another drawer, and took out a check. He laid it on the desk, directly in front of Vivian. The check was blank, except for his signature in the bottom corner. "Option 1, Marco said. "You write any number you want on this check. Your mother's debt, gone. Your brother's tuition, done. Money to buy a new house in another city, also possible. You take the money, you disappear from Chicago, and you never speak my name, or anything you saw last night, ever again. Your old life ends. Your new life begins." Vivian stared at the check as if it were a venomous snake. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. A way out of poverty, a chance to save her mother and give Ethan a future. But she knew nothing came free, especially not from men like Marco Valenti. "And option 2, she asked, even though part of her was screaming that she did not want to know. Marco's gray eyes darkened, and for a moment she saw something there besides coldness. Something more dangerous, but also more compelling. "Option 2 is far more complicated," he said slowly, "and far more dangerous. But if you are willing to listen, I am willing to speak." Vivian looked at Marco, waiting for him to continue, and in that silence she could hear her heart pounding like a war drum. Marco moved toward the window, staring out at the Chicago night as if he were weighing each word before letting it go. When he turned back, his gray eyes were sharper, like a newly honed blade. "My wife was killed last night," he said it with a calm that was terrifying. "The police think I did it. Her family thinks I did it. This whole city thinks I did it. But I did not kill Natasha." He paused, letting the weight of the statement sink into the air. "Someone killed her and pinned it on me. Someone wants to spark a war between me and the Petrov family, Natasha's mother's side. And I need to find that person before everything explodes." Vivian did not understand what any of this had to do with her, and the confusion must have shown on her face, because Marco gave a small laugh, a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "You are a witness, Vivian. You were there last night. You saw Natasha with her lover. You heard what she said. The police believe you. They think you are just a poor waitress who got pulled into this by accident." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need eyes and ears in places I cannot go. I need someone no one suspects. And you, Vivian Hayes, are perfect for that job." "You want me to spy for you?" Vivian said it. "Not a question. I want you to help me find the person who killed my wife and is trying to destroy me." Marco's voice did not waver. "In return, you get everything option 1 offers. Your debts erased. Your mother given the best care. Your brother in college. Plus my protection. Safety for you and your family. A place in my world. A world where people get shot in the head." Vivian answered, her voice sharp with bitterness. "A world where loyal people are protected at any cost," Marco corrected, "and traitors get what they deserve." Silence stretched between them. Vivian looked down at the file folder still open on her lap. She saw the photo of her mother, thin on a hospital bed, She saw Ethan smiling bright in his school uniform. She saw the glaring red numbers of debt. She thought about 4 years of grinding work that still was not enough. She thought about the worn shoes she had been wearing for 10 months. She thought about what it felt like to be invisible beneath the careless laughter of rich customers. And she thought about the gray eyes watching her now. The eyes of the first man who had truly seen her, not looked through her as if she did not exist. "If I agree," Vivian spoke slowly. "I have conditions." One of Marco's brows lifted. He was clearly not used to anyone daring to set conditions with him. But he did not interrupt. He only waited. "My mother gets transferred to the best facility, with the best doctors. My brother gets into Northwestern, a full scholarship funded anonymously, so no one gets suspicious." Vivian drew a deep breath before she continued. "And there are no secrets between us. You do not get to use me as bait without telling me. If I am walking into danger, I need to know ahead of time." Marco studied her for a long moment. Long enough that Vivian began to think she had pushed too far. Then he did something she did not expect. He laughed, a real laugh, one that softened the gray of his eyes for the briefest moment. "You ask for a lot, Vivian Hayes. You need me," she answered, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Do not pretend otherwise." Silence. Then Marco nodded slowly. "Fine. Everything you asked for." He held out his hand, a large hand with long fingers and a silver ring on his left ring finger. "Welcome to the family, Vivian. Try not to die." Vivian stared at that hand, knowing that once she took it, there would be no way back. She thought of her mother, of Ethan, of the life she had been trying to hold together for so many years. Then she reached out and took Marco's hand. His grip was warm and firm, closing around hers with just enough pressure to make her understand this was not a game. Fate was sealed, and Vivian Hayes was no longer an anonymous waitress. Salvatore led Vivian to a suite in the east wing of the mansion, right after she left Marco's study, and with every step that carried her deeper into this unfamiliar world, she felt as if she were falling into a bottomless pit. The room Salvatore opened for her was not a room. It was a complete apartment, larger than the place she had lived in for the past 5 years. A king-size bed with sheets white as clouds sat at the center of the bedroom, its headboard carved wood pressed against a wall, covered in classic patterned wallpaper. Large windows draped in cream velvet looked out over the back garden, where warm golden lights shimmered on rose bushes and a small fountain. The private bathroom held a marble tub large enough for 2, and a shower with 6 spray heads, the kind she had only seen in movies about the rich. A separate dressing room waited beyond, with a full-length mirror and bright lighting like a high-end boutique. "Your belongings will be brought over from your old apartment tomorrow morning," Salvatore said, his voice still rough and even, as if a waitress suddenly moving into a Mafia boss's mansion was something that happened every day. "For tonight, Mr. Valenti has already prepared a few things for you." He pointed toward the dressing room, and when Vivian stepped inside, she almost forgot how to breathe. White oak closets were filled with clothing, all of it still tagged. Dresses, coats, trousers, blouses, everything from brands she had only ever dared to admire through glass when she passed the shopping streets. High heels stood in neat rows on the shelves, from basic black to vivid red, each pair probably worth a month of her rent. Drawers were stocked with silk and lace lingerie, fabric so soft she was afraid to touch it because her hands felt too rough. Designer handbags hung from hooks. Perfume bottles lined the vanity. Jewelry glittered inside velvet boxes. Vivian stood in the middle of that dressing room, surrounded by luxury and polish, and she could not breathe. This was not a gift. This was a uniform. This was Marco Valenti's way of marking territory, making her part of his world, erasing every trace of the poor waitress she had been. Salvatore left after showing her how to use the intercom system and telling her breakfast would be served at 8 in the small dining room. Alone in the lavish silence, Vivian walked the suite in circles, touching each thing as if it might disappear at any moment. She turned on the hot water in the bathroom and watched steam rise, wondering whether this was the last time she would ever be allowed unlimited hot water, or the beginning of a new life. She lay down on the soft bed and stared up at the high ceiling, feeling the cool silk sheets against her back, and realized she could not sleep even though she was exhausted. A golden cage was still a cage. She thought of her mother lying in the hospital, of Ethan asleep at her grandmother's house, unaware where his sister was. She had called them before Salvatore came to pick her up, lying that she had been hired as an assistant for a wealthy businessman and had to live at her employer's home for a while. Her mother had sounded worried but did not ask much, too drained after chemotherapy. Ethan had been excited, telling her to remember to send pictures of the mansion. She had not sent any. Through the window, Vivian could see the silhouettes of guards patrolling the garden, handguns glinting under the moonlight. She was inside a palace, But these gilded walls were not here to keep her safe. They were here to keep her in. The next morning, Vivian was called down to the small dining room at 7 o'clock instead of 8, the way Salvatore had said, and she knew at once that something had shifted. Marco sat at the head of the table with a cup of black coffee in front of him, still wearing a black suit like armor, and his gray eyes were steel cold even though the day had not fully brightened yet. Salvatore stood beside him with a small black box in his hand, and the air in the room felt so heavy Vivian struggled to breathe the moment she stepped inside. "Detective Harrison wants to see you." Marco did not bother with a greeting. His voice went straight to the point. "He called this morning, asking you to come to the station to answer a few more questions." Vivian sat in the chair across from Marco, feeling the softness of the leather cushion beneath the new silk dress she had chosen from the dressing room. "What should I tell him?" "The truth," Marco answered, a thin smile passing over his mouth. "Or at least the version of the truth we want him to hear." He signaled to Salvatore, and the older man stepped forward and set the black box in front of Vivian. "Open it." Inside the box was a tiny device, no bigger than the tip of a pinky finger, matte black and thin as paper. Vivian did not need anyone to explain what it was. "You want me to record the police?" Her voice stayed flat, even as her heart beat like a drum. "I want to know what he knows, what he suspects, and who he is talking to." Marco leaned forward, gray eyes fixed on hers. "Harrison is not as trustworthy as he looks. He was too quick to decide I am guilty, too certain without evidence. That is not normal for a seasoned detective." Vivian looked at the miniature recorder and thought about what she was about to do. Secretly recording a police officer was a federal crime if she was caught, but she was too deep to turn back now. She had shaken hands with the devil, and now she had to dance to his music. "Where do I put it?" Salvatore showed her how to attach the device to the inside of her bra, where no one could see it, and where it would not be detected by ordinary metal detectors. An hour later, Vivian sat in the familiar black SUV, being driven to the 18th District station with her heart out of rhythm and the recorder pressed close to her skin like a burning secret. Detective Harrison met her in the lobby with a face more severe than the last time. He led her to the same interrogation room, but this time there was a thicker file on the table, and a strain he did not bother to hide. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hayes," Harrison said as they both sat down. "I have some new information I need to share with you." Vivian stayed silent and let him continue. "Derek Sullivan." Harrison opened the file, took out a photograph, and placed it in front of Vivian. It was the blonde man with the expensive Rolex she had seen sitting beside Natasha that night. "Do you recognize him? He was at the table with the woman at the restaurant." Vivian answered, her voice calm even as her heart went wild. "I do not know his name." "Derek Sullivan, 34, businessman," Harrison said. The words weighted and grim. "He was found this morning in his private car at the bottom of Lake Michigan. One bullet to the back of the head, a Mafia-style execution." Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Derek Sullivan was dead. The lover, the man who had held Natasha's hand and laughed about her husband knowing nothing. Now he was dead too, the way she was. 2 people from Table 12 that night, both killed in less than 48 hours. "Miss Hayes," Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I know you are scared. And you have reason to be. Marco Valenti is eliminating everyone connected to his wife's affair." He paused, staring straight into Vivian's eyes. "You are a witness. You were there. You saw them together. If Valenti is cleaning house, you could be next on the list." Vivian kept her face steady, even as everything inside her broke into noise. She thought of Marco, of their agreement, of the way he had said he did not kill Natasha. But what about Derek Sullivan? Had Marco ordered it? Was she living under the same roof as a murderer? "I do not know anything about Mr. Valenti." She heard how firm her voice sounded, and it startled her. "I am just a waitress who accidentally spilled water." Harrison watched her for a long time, then let out a heavy sigh. "All right, Miss Hayes, but remember what I told you. Valenti is dangerous, and people around him tend to die." When Vivian left the police station, the recorder still lay quiet beneath her clothes. She could not stop seeing Derek Sullivan at the bottom of Lake Michigan, a bullet in his head, the cold pressing in from every side, and she wondered if she was walking the same path. On the drive back to the mansion, Vivian sat in silence in the black SUV, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. The recording device still lay tucked beneath her clothes, heavy as a small stone pressing against her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to replay the conversation with Harrison from beginning to end, sentence by sentence, word by word, searching for something that felt wrong but that she still could not name. And then it came. Like lightning cutting through fog, Harrison had said Derek Sullivan was found this morning, but when Vivian left the mansion to go to the police station, she had glanced at her phone to check the news. There was nothing about Derek Sullivan. Not a single line about a businessman dead at the bottom of Lake Michigan. She checked again while she waited in the police station lobby, scrolling through every local news feed. Still, nothing. And even now, as she opened her phone again in the car, the news sites were still silent about it. So how did Harrison know? How could he speak about Derek Sullivan being found as if it were already public, when it had not appeared in any media at all? By the time the SUV stopped at the mansion gate, Vivian had an answer, or at least a suspicion too large to ignore. She went inside with faster steps than usual, heading straight for Marco's study without waiting for anyone to guide her. She had memorized the way after a sleepless night wandering the mansion. Marco was sitting behind his desk when she entered, Salvatore standing beside him with a tablet in his hand. Both men looked up as she appeared, and Vivian did not wait to be invited before she spoke. Harrison knew about Derek Sullivan before the news was released. Silence. Marco and Salvatore traded a quick glance. Then Marco signaled for her to sit. Explain. His voice was sharper than usual. Vivian sat in the familiar chair and told him everything. How Harrison had said Derek Sullivan was found this morning. How she had checked the news several times and seen nothing. How certain his voice had been, as if he had known before the police officially announced anything. He said it was a Mafia-style execution. Vivian continued, her words coming faster as the pieces began to lock together in her mind. He talked like he knew exactly what happened. Not like he was investigating. Like he already had the answer. Marco sat without speaking for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the wooden desk. Then he turned to Salvatore. Check when the Sullivan news was officially released. Salvatore worked the tablet for a few seconds. 11:30 this morning, sir. After Miss Hayes had left the police station for more than an hour. Marco's gray eyes returned to Vivian. This time there was something different in them. Not the coldness or calculation she had grown used to. It was approval. You are sharp, he said it more softly. 4 years waiting tables taught you to observe better than people who were trained. Vivian did not know whether it was praise or simply an observation, but she felt heat rise into her cheeks. I just noticed what did not make sense. That is a valuable skill. Marco stood and walked to the window in that familiar posture. Harrison knowing about Sullivan before the public means he has an internal source. Or worse, he is involved. He turned back to her. You just gave me the first real lead, Vivian, and I do not forget the people who helped me. Vivian nodded, not knowing what to say. She had gone deeper into this world without realizing it, and now she was standing beside Marco Valenti, helping him hunt an enemy. She was not prey anymore. She was becoming the hunter. 3 days after Vivian found the lead about Harrison, she stood in front of the mirror in the mansion's dressing room and stared at a stranger wearing her face. The black dress fell to her knees, tailored with a quiet precision, fitted to her body as if it had been made for her alone. The black high heels were soft leather, the kind of shoes that 3 days ago she would not have dared to dream about. Her hair had been swept into a neat twist at the nape of her neck by a staff member Marco had sent, and her makeup was light, understated, and so refined she almost did not recognize herself. Today was Natasha Valenti's funeral, and she would be going with Marco. When she came down the staircase, Marco was already waiting in the foyer, dressed in a perfectly cut black suit as always, but with a black tie and a black pocket square folded into his breast pocket. He looked her over from head to toe as she descended, and for one brief moment Vivian thought she saw something in his gray eyes beyond the coldness, but it vanished too fast for her to be sure. You look appropriate. Marco said it without praise, but without criticism either. Remember, today you are my eyes. Watch everything, everyone, who cries and who does not, who looks at me with hatred, who looks with fear. The killer always comes to the victim's funeral. Holy Name Cathedral rose in Gothic splendor, its bell towers reaching into the dull gray sky of Chicago in November. A fine rain fell like mist, softening the edges of hundreds of black umbrellas gathered outside. When Marco's SUV stopped at the cathedral gates, Vivian saw the crowd waiting and felt her stomach tighten. There were at least a few hundred people, all in expensive black, all turning their heads the moment Marco stepped out of the vehicle, and then he held out his hand to her. Vivian placed her hand in Marco's large one and stepped down, feeling hundreds of eyes snap toward her at once. Who is she? They whispered. What is she doing beside Marco Valenti at his wife's funeral? Those looks cut like knives, curious, contemptuous, and in some faces openly hostile enough that Vivian felt as if she were walking across a minefield. Marco's hand moved to her back, settling lightly at the hollow of her spine, and the heat of his palm seeped through the thin fabric of her dress. It was a gesture of possession, of protection, and also a statement to everyone watching that she belonged to him. Vivian did not know whether to feel safer or more afraid. Inside the cathedral, the air was heavy with the scent of lilies and candle wax. Natasha's casket sat before the altar, covered in white roses. and the portrait on the easel showed a version of her far more perfect than the drunken woman Vivian had met that night. The front pews were reserved for family, and Vivian saw a cluster of people dressed in black sitting there with faces set hard by grief and hatred. An older man with snow-white hair and eyes as gray and cold as ice sat in the center, and when he saw Marco enter, that gaze flared with such pure loathing Vivian had to fight the urge to step back. "Nikolai Petrov," Marco murmured near her ear, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Natasha's father. He believes I killed his daughter." Vivian watched the way Marco had instructed. She saw politicians she had only ever seen on television, businessmen with names that carried weight in this city, and men who looked polished and refined but had eyes cold as assassins. Men she guessed were other Mafia bosses. She saw who cried for real, tears streaking down their cheeks, and who performed grief, eyes dry as desert sand even as their mouths twisted with sorrow. She saw heavy handshakes and hollow condolences, and she saw the way all of them looked at Marco, with fear laced with hatred, as if he were a monster they did not dare touch, but could not stop watching. This was Marco Valenti's world, and now, whether she wanted it or not, it was hers too. The funeral ended with prayers echoing beneath the cathedral's high vaults, and the crowd began to move outside to see Natasha off to her final resting place. Vivian walked beside Marco, his hand still set at her back like a silent declaration to everyone watching. She could feel the eyes tracking them, the whispers spreading like fire through dry grass, but she kept her chin up and her gaze steady, the way Marco had taught her before they left the mansion that morning. They had just stepped down the stone stairs at the front of the cathedral when a voice rose, heavy as thunder and filled with hatred. "Valenti." Marco stopped, and Vivian felt the muscles in his back tighten beneath the fabric of his suit. She turned and saw Nikolai Petrov coming toward them, 3 sons built like walls of flesh moving behind him. His silver hair was soaked with misty rain, but he did not care. His steel-gray eyes burned with the pure flame of loathing. "Mr. Petrov," Marco answered, his calm almost unnatural in the face of a father who had just buried his child. "I am sorry for your loss." "Sorry." Nikolai spat the word as if it were poison on his tongue. "You have the nerve to come here, stand in front of my daughter's coffin, and offer condolences." He stepped closer, and Vivian could see the veins rising at his temple. "You killed my daughter, Valenti. You killed Natasha." "I did not kill Natasha." Marco's voice stayed flat, like a lake sealed in ice. "Someone did this, and wants you to believe I am responsible. Someone wants us pointing guns at each other, instead of finding the one who is truly guilty." Nikolai laughed, a rough sound with no joy in it. "You think I am stupid enough to believe your lies." He spit on the ground, right in front of Marco's shoes. "This whole city knows your wife was cheating. This whole city knows you are a man who never forgives. And now Natasha is lying in a coffin, and you are standing here with a new whore." Nikolai's gaze shifted to Vivian, and the contempt in it struck like a slap. "You..." He looked her up and down as if she were something crawling. "Who are you to dare come here? My daughter is not even cold yet, and her husband brings his new whore to her funeral." Vivian felt heat flood her face. For 1 second her ears rang. She had been called many things in her life, had been humiliated by wealthy customers who treated her like trash, but never like this. Never in front of so many people, never by a man looking at her as if she did not deserve to breathe the same air as him. And then, she did not know where the courage came from, but she opened her mouth. "I am Vivian Hayes." Her voice sounded steadier than she expected, even as her heart hammered like a mallet against her ribs. "And with all due respect for your grief, Mr. Petrov, I am not what you just called me. Your wife is waiting for you at home, and this is your daughter's funeral. Maybe this is not the time to argue about things you do not fully understand." Silence. So complete Vivian could hear rain ticking against the umbrellas around them. Nikolai stared at her, gray eyes widened with surprise, and she could see his 3 sons staring too, as if she had grown a second head. "You," Nikolai began, but Marco cut in. "We should continue, Mr. Petrov." His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp as glass. "Natasha deserves to rest in peace." Nikolai looked from Vivian to Marco, then back to Vivian. "You picked one with thorns." He said it to Marco, his voice still thick with hatred, but with something else threaded through it. Surprise, perhaps, or even a flicker of unwilling respect. "But thorns will not save you. War is coming, Valenti, and this time you will lose." He turned away, his sons following, and Vivian let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Marco's hand tightened lightly at her back, and when she looked up, she saw something new in his cold gray eyes. Approval, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a glint of amusement. "You do have thorns, Vivian Hayes." he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. I did not choose wrong. After the confrontation with Nikolai Petrov, the funeral continued with the burial rite at Rose Hill Cemetery, one of Chicago's oldest cemeteries, hidden among rows of ancient maple trees. Vivian stood beside Marco as Natasha's casket was lowered into the grave, cold rain soaking through the thin coat she had thrown on in a hurry before leaving the cathedral. She tried to focus on the task Marco had given her, to watch everyone, to remember everything, but her mind still swam from facing Natasha's father, and because she was forcing herself to steady, she saw him. A man stood apart from the crowd, half concealed behind a large oak about 30 meters from the grave. He was not dressed in mourning like the others. Instead, he wore a brown leather jacket and dark jeans, looking more like someone who had wandered by on a casual walk than a guest come to pay respects. But what caught Vivian's attention was not his clothing. It was the way he looked. He was not watching the coffin, not watching the Petrov family as they cried. He was watching Marco, and watching her. A chill ran down Vivian's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. The man looked about 35, his face so ordinary he could disappear into any crowd. But his eyes were not ordinary at all. They were sharp, calculating, gathering information the way a hunting animal measures its prey. Vivian tilted her head toward Marco. She did not dare turn fully, afraid the man would know she had spotted him. 2 o'clock, she whispered, so low it was almost breath. Brown hair, leather jacket. He is watching us. Marco did not turn. He did not change his posture. But Vivian felt his body tighten beside her. His gaze slid in the direction she indicated, easy and natural, like he was simply scanning the cemetery, and she knew he had seen. Tony Ritchie, Marco said it with a calm that sounded like nothing at all. He works for the Genovese family in New York. Vivian's stomach tightened. Genovese, one of the 5 major Mafia families in the United States, a direct rival of Valenti's for decades. Why is he here? At your wife's funeral? That is a good question. Marco answered, and there was something dangerous in his voice, like thunder growling before a storm. He turned to Salvatore, who had been standing behind them in loyal silence, like a shadow. Follow Ricci. I want to know everything. Which hotel he is staying in, who he meets, who he talks to, what he eats, who he sleeps with. Everything. Salvatore gave a nod so slight it was almost invisible, and then disappeared into the crowd, as if he had never been there at all. Vivian looked back toward the oak, but Tony Ricci was gone. Only the empty space where he had stood remained, and the cold feeling inside her chest. He is gone, she said, but he will be back. Marco replied, his gray eyes fixed on the distance with a calculating stare. Men like Ricci do not come to funerals to mourn. They come to collect information, to measure an enemy, to find a weak spot. He looked down at Vivian, and she saw a dangerous spark in his eyes. You spotted him before my security team did. 4 years waiting tables really did teach you a lot. I am just used to noticing what does not fit, Vivian answered. But inside her, questions burned. What did the Genovese family have to do with Natasha's death? And Detective Harrison, with information he had before the public did, could he be the link between the two sides? The pieces were beginning to appear, but the full picture was still blurred, lost in the fog. That night Vivian could not sleep. The images of the funeral kept looping in her mind, over and over, from Nikolai Petrov's hateful eyes to Tony Ricci's cold stare from behind the oak. She turned on the bed, the mattress huge like an oasis in a room that still did not feel like hers. The silk sheets cool against her back but offering no comfort at all. At last, when the clock struck 2 in the morning and sleep still refused to come, she got up and stepped out onto the balcony. Chicago's night cut like a blade. The November wind carried damp breath off Lake Michigan and slapped her face with icy fingers. Vivian leaned against the iron railing, looking down at the garden swallowed in darkness, and beyond it the city skyline glittering with lights. She was trying to sort the chaos in her thoughts when she heard footsteps behind her. You cannot sleep either. Vivian turned and saw Marco standing in the doorway to the balcony. He was no longer in his black suit, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark trousers. He looked more tired than usual, the lines of his face tighter, and for the first time Vivian saw something in his gray eyes beyond coldness or calculation. She saw exhaustion. You too, she said, not a question. Marco stepped out and stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the skyline as if searching for answers in that sea of lights. I rarely sleep after a funeral, even when it is someone else's. Silence stretched between them, but it was not the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence of 2 people sharing the same sleepless night, the same unspoken weight. Do you ever get tired? Vivian asked, her voice as soft as the wind. Of all of this. Enemies, schemes, people who want to kill you. Do you ever just want to walk away and live like an ordinary man? Marco gave a small laugh, short and joyless. Every day. But if I stop, everything collapses. The people who depend on me will have no one to protect them. My enemies will devour everything I have built. He paused, looking down at his hands. I do not have that luxury. No one should have to carry the world on their shoulders, Vivian said, and she surprised herself with the gentleness in her voice. Marco turned to look at her, gray eyes deep in the thin moonlight. You are different from the people I usually meet, Vivian Hayes, because I am not afraid of you, because you do not want anything from me. His voice dropped lower. Not money, not power, not status. You are here because circumstances pushed you here. But you are not trying to exploit it. You only want to protect your family. And what about you? Vivian asked, turning fully to face him. What do you want from me? Besides being your eyes and ears and helping you find who killed Natasha. Marco was silent for a long time. Long enough that Vivian thought he would not answer at all. Then he stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell cedar and tobacco on him. Close enough that she could see tiny flecks of gold inside the gray. I want, he started, then stopped, as if wrestling with himself. For the first time in 12 years, someone is looking at me like a human being. Not a boss, not a monster, just Marco. His hand lifted. His fingertips brushed her cheek, light as a butterfly, and Vivian felt her skin flare where he touched her. She knew she should step back. She knew she should say something to break the moment before it went too far. But she did not. She stayed still, and she let him lean down. The kiss came gently, his mouth barely touching hers like a silent question, and when she did not pull away, he kissed her deeper, one hand sliding into her hair, the other wrapping around her waist and drawing her close. Vivian felt the world fall away, leaving only the heat of his body, the taste of whiskey lingering on his lips, and the sound of her heart beating as if it might break her open. Then Marco pulled back, sudden, as if he had been shocked. No. His voice was rough. Not now. Not when you are here because you need me. Because you have no other choice. He stepped back, both hands clenched at his sides, as if holding himself in place. I do not want you like that. I want you free. I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you have to. Then he turned away and vanished into the mansion's shadow, leaving Vivian alone on the balcony with her heart out of rhythm and her lips still burning. 2 days after the night on the balcony, Vivian and Marco barely spoke in private. He avoided being alone with her, always keeping Salvatore or a guard present, leaving Vivian torn between relief and a strange ache. The kiss haunted her, the taste of whiskey, the protective weight of his hand, and the pain in his eyes when he pulled away. But on the third morning, Salvatore's grim expression signaled an end to her reflection. Mr. Valenti needs you in the study. Now. Inside, Marco stood with a tablet, his gray eyes burning with a controlled, lethal rage. He pushed the screen toward her. Look. The surveillance photos showed Tony Ricci in a parking garage, shaking hands with Detective James Harrison. Harrison has been on the Genovese payroll for 2 years. Marco's voice was ice. He isn't investigating Natasha's death. He's orchestrating a war between me and the Petrovses. Vivian realized then that the man who warned her about the monster was the snake itself. Marco looked at her, the trap already set. The next step requires a decoy. Vivian, will you be the bait? 2 days after the night on the balcony, Vivian and Marco barely spoke to each other in private. He avoided being alone with her. Salvatore or someone else was always present whenever they were in the same room, and Vivian did not know whether to feel relieved or hurt. The kiss still haunted her every night, the taste of whiskey on his mouth, the way his hand had wrapped around her waist, and the pained look in his eyes when he pulled away. But she did not have time to sit with it for long, because on the morning of the third day, Salvatore knocked on her door with a gravity on his face that told her something big had happened. Mr. Valenti needs you in his study. Right now. Vivian did not ask why. She dressed quickly and followed Salvatore through the familiar corridors, her heart beating faster with every step. When she entered Marco's study, she saw him standing behind the desk with a tablet in his hand, and his gray eyes were burning with something she had never seen in them before. Rage. Pure rage, held back by the thinnest thread of self-control. Close the door, Marco said to Salvatore, and when the door shut, he set the tablet on the desk and pushed it toward Vivian. Look. Vivian looked down at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. They were surveillance photos, shot from a distance but clear enough to recognize 2 men talking in an underground parking garage. One of them was Tony Ricci, the man she had seen at Natasha's funeral, and the other, the one shaking Ricci's hand like an old partner, was Detective James Harrison. No, Vivian whispered, refusing to believe what her eyes were showing her. It cannot be. It can, and it did. Marco's voice was cold as ice. Salvatore's team has been tailing Ricci for 2 days. He met Harrison 3 times, each time in a different location, each time exchanging something. Marco swiped the screen, revealing more photographs. Harrison taking a thick envelope from Ricci. Harrison handing Ricci a USB drive. Harrison and Ricci sitting in a suburban cafe, heads bent close together like conspirators. Harrison has been working for the Genovese for at least 2 years, according to my source. He is their eyes and ears inside the Chicago Police Department. He protects their operations and feeds them internal information. Vivian's knees went weak and she had to grip the edge of the desk to stay upright. Harrison, the man who had looked her in the eye and warned her about Marco. The man who had pretended to care about her safety while he was really working for an enemy. The man she had worn a wire for, not knowing she had been sitting across from a venomous snake dressed up as a protector. He convinced me you were dangerous, Vivian said, her voice shaking. He tried to pull me away from you, and he is the one controlling the investigation into Natasha's death. Marco continued, his eyes never leaving her. He is pushing every suspicion toward me, making sure the police and the Petrov family both believe I am responsible. He wants to ignite a war between me and Nikolai, a war where both sides bleed heavily, and the Genovese pick up what is left. Vivian finished, the last picture finally coming into focus in her mind. But who killed Natasha? The Genovese, or Harrison himself? Marco was silent for a long moment, gray eyes fixed on nothing, as if he were calculating 100 possibilities. I think Harrison did it with his own hands, or he ordered someone else to do it. Natasha was the perfect target. My wife was cheating openly, a murder that could be laid easily at the feet of a betrayed husband. He looked down at Vivian, and there was something dark and dangerous in his eyes. The next step is a trap, and you, Vivian, will be the bait. Vivian swallowed hard, remembering their agreement, remembering how she had told him he could not use her as bait without warning her first. And now he was warning her. I promise no secrets, Marco said, as if he had read her thoughts. So I am asking you first. Are you willing? Vivian looked into Marco's gray eyes and saw something she had never seen there before. Real worry, hidden behind the cold shell. He was giving her a choice. He was keeping his promise. No secrets. And that mattered to her more than any words ever could. She thought of her mother being cared for in the best hospital in the city, of Ethan putting together his Northwestern application, without fear of money, of everything Marco had done for her, even though she had been nobody, just an anonymous waitress pulled into his world. And she thought of the kiss on the balcony, of how he had stopped because he wanted her to have a choice. I am willing. She said it with a steadiness she did not feel. What is the plan? Marco nodded. He did not look surprised, but she saw his shoulders ease, just a fraction, as if a weight had been set down. He opened a drawer and pulled out a map and several photographs, spreading them across the desk like a general preparing for battle. Harrison believes you are still cooperating with the police, still feeding them information about me. He will want to meet you, to make sure you are not betraying him, or to remove you if he suspects you are. We are going to give him that opportunity. Salvatore stepped into the room at that moment, carrying a small box like the one before. New device. He set it on the desk, undetectable by any scanner on the market. You will wear it when you meet Harrison, and we will hear everything in real time. And if he wants to kill me, Vivian asked, forcing her voice not to shake. He will not have time. Marco answered, his gaze locked on hers. I will have 6 men positioned around you. I will be 50 meters away, listening through an earpiece. If there is any sign of danger, say the word poison, and we move in immediately. He paused and stepped closer. I will not let anyone touch you. That is a promise. As if the universe were listening, Vivian's phone vibrated right then. She looked at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. Detective Harrison, answer it. Marco's voice was low. Put it on speaker. Vivian tapped the button and set the phone on the desk between them. Miss Hayes. Harrison's voice came through the speaker, still weary and concerned the way it always sounded. I need to see you. Alone. I have important information about Valenti that could save your life. Vivian looked at Marco, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. Where? She asked, making her voice sound like a frightened girl who needed help. There is an old warehouse in the South Loop, at the corner of 18th and Canal. Tonight, 9 o'clock. Come alone. Do not tell anyone. Harrison paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of manufactured urgency. I know you are living with Valenti. I know you think he is protecting you. But you are wrong, Miss Hayes. He is using you. And when he is done, you will end up like Natasha. Vivian wanted to laugh in his face at the hypocrisy. She wanted to scream that she knew who he really was, but she swallowed it all down and said only one word. Okay. The call ended, and silence settled over the room. Marco looked at her with an expression she could not read. Then he spoke, his voice low and certain. Tonight we end this. The warehouse in the South Loop was an old red brick building from Chicago's industrial age. Its broken windows, like empty eye sockets, staring down at a deserted street. Vivian stepped out of the taxi Marco had arranged, feeling the tiny recorder pressed tight against the skin of her chest like a reminder that she was not entirely alone. Somewhere in the darkness, 6 of Marco's men were watching. Somewhere in a vehicle 50 meters away, Marco was listening to every breath she took through an earpiece. But when she pushed open the rusted metal door and stepped inside, she still felt more alone than she ever had in her life. The interior was black as ink, lit only by a few industrial bulbs dangling from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow glow. Dust and old machine oil hit her nose, mixed with the damp rot of a building abandoned too long. Vivian walked farther in, her heels clicking against cracked concrete, her heart pounding like a war drum in her ribs. She had rehearsed this scene in her mind a dozen times on the way here, but no amount of preparation could make her ready for what was about to happen. Miss Hayes. The voice rose from the darkness ahead, and Harrison stepped into the light. But this was not the Harrison Vivian had met at the police station. Not the weary detective with worried eyes and a voice full of concern. The man standing in front of her now had eyes cold as stone, lips pressed into a hard line, and a whole body language that radiated danger he had kept hidden before. This was his real face, the face of a predator watching its prey. You came alone, like I said. Harrison nodded, his gaze sweeping her from head to toe as if searching for something. Good. I was afraid Valenti would not let you come. You said you had information that could save me. Vivian kept her voice trembling, the right amount for a frightened girl. What information? Harrison laughed, a rough sound with not a trace of humor. Information. You really believed I called you here to share information. He stepped closer, and Vivian had to fight the instinct to back away. I called you here because you know too much, Miss Hayes. You were at table 12 that night. You heard Natasha talk about the affair. You saw her with Derek Sullivan. And now you are living in Valenti's house, acting as his eyes and ears. Vivian felt her blood freeze when she realized Harrison knew more than she had thought. I do not understand what you are talking about. Do not play stupid with me. Harrison snapped, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse. I know you figured out I knew about Sullivan before the news went public. I saw the way you looked at me in that interrogation room, the spark of suspicion in your eyes. You think I did not notice? Vivian said nothing, letting silence answer for her. Harrison exhaled, as if he were tired of explaining. You want the truth, Miss Hayes. Fine, I will give it to you. You are not walking out of here alive anyway. He began circling her the way a wolf worries prey. I have been working for the Genovese family for 3 years. They pay me more than 10 times a detective's salary to protect their operations in Chicago and feed them inside information on rival families. But the Genovese want more than that. They want Chicago, and the only way to get Chicago is to remove Marco Valenti. So you killed Natasha. Vivian said it. Not a question. Natasha was the perfect target. Harrison nodded, making no effort to hide it. A wife cheating openly. A husband famous for never forgiving betrayal. Everyone would believe Valenti killed her out of jealousy. And when Nikolai Petrov declares war on Valenti, when the two families slaughter each other, the Genovese step in and take everything. He stopped in front of Vivian, looking down at her with a counterfeit regret. The plan was going perfectly, until you showed up. I am just a waitress who accidentally spilled water. Vivian's voice stayed steady, even as her heart tried to climb out of her chest. You are a witness, Harrison corrected. And worse, you are smart, sharp. You noticed something was wrong and you told Valenti, and now I have to clean up this mess. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a handgun, aiming it straight at Vivian's chest. You are going to die here tonight, Miss Hayes, and I will pin it on Valenti. Say he killed you because you knew too much. Another witness eliminated by the jealous husband. A perfect story. Vivian stared into the black mouth of the gun pointed at her, but instead of fear, she felt a strange calm spreading through her. She thought of Marco listening to every word, of the security team waiting in position, of his promise that no one would lay a hand on her, and she smiled. You talk too much, Detective Harrison. But your words, your betrayal, it's all just poison. Her voice did not tremble now. And the recorder under my clothes has captured everything. Harrison's eyes widened in the instant he understood, and in that same instant, the warehouse door burst open. Marco burst in like a storm, gun already raised, gray eyes blazing with a fury Vivian had never seen before. Behind him, Salvatore and 5 other men flooded into the warehouse, surrounding Harrison from every direction in less than 3 seconds. Harrison swung his gun toward Marco, but he was too slow. A shot cracked through the air, and the pistol flew from Harrison's hand with a scream of pain as the bullet tore through his wrist. He collapsed onto the concrete, blood spilling from the wound and soaking into the thick dust, while Marco stepped forward and stood over him with the posture of a god passing judgment. "You thought you could touch what is mine." Marco's voice was so cold the air seemed to harden around it. "You thought you could kill my wife, pin it on me, and then kill the one I am protecting." Harrison sneered, even as his face went pale from pain and blood loss. "Protect her. Valenti, you are lying to yourself. She is just a tool, like everyone else. You do not know how to love anyone but yourself." Marco did not answer. Instead, he turned to Vivian, and for one brief moment, the cold armor cracked enough for her to see the real worry underneath. "Are you all right?" His voice softened dramatically. "Did he hurt you?" Vivian shook her head, not trusting her voice if she tried to use it. She was still trembling, not from Harrison anymore, but from the realization that she had just stood one trigger pull away from death. Marco nodded, then turned back to Harrison, the gun still aimed at his head. "The Genovese will not let you go." Harrison spat, blood smeared on his lips. "Kill me, and they will send 10 more. You cannot win this war, Valenti." "I do not need to win," Marco answered, calm as a grave. "I only need to survive long enough to destroy them one by one." He pulled the trigger. The gunshot thundered through the empty warehouse, ending the life of the man who had killed Natasha and nearly killed Vivian. A week after that night, everything had changed. The recording from the device was sent to the FBI anonymously, exposing the Genovese corruption network inside the Chicago Police Department. Harrison was declared missing, and no one asked questions. The Genovese family withdrew from Chicago after receiving clear signals that this war was not worth pursuing. And Nikolai Petrov, after hearing the recording of Harrison confessing to Natasha's murder, called Marco in a conversation that lasted 2 hours. No one knew what they said, but when the call ended, the threat of war between the two families dissolved like morning fog. One evening, Vivian stood in Marco's study, looking out the window at Chicago glittering with lights below. Her mother was recovering better than expected with a new treatment plan. Ethan had received his acceptance letter from Northwestern along with a full scholarship. Everything Vivian had ever dreamed of had come true. And now Marco stood behind her with an offer. "You can leave." His voice was low and even. "The threat is over. Your family is safe. You are free to walk away from here anytime you want." Vivian turned to look at him, the man who had changed her life in less than 2 weeks. A mafia boss with steel, cold gray eyes who had kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. A man who killed without hesitation, yet kept his promise that there would be no secrets between them. Darkness made flesh, and yet the only light that had guided her through her darkest days. "What if I choose to stay?" she asked. Marco looked at her, and for the first time since they met, she saw hope in those gray eyes. "Then what would you stay as?" "Partner," Vivian answered, remembering the word she had used the night they made their agreement. "Not a tool, not bait, not a lover to pass the time. Partner, in everything." Marco stepped closer. His hand lifted her chin gently. "Do you understand what that means? Being with me means living in darkness, facing enemies, never having a normal life." "I have lived in darkness my whole life," Vivian answered, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the beat of his heart under the expensive fabric. "Poverty is darkness. Desperation is darkness. Being invisible is darkness. At least your darkness makes me feel seen, valued, protected." Marco said nothing. He only leaned down and kissed her, this time without stopping, without pulling away. And Vivian knew she had found where she belonged, even if that place was in the arms of a mafia boss in the stormy heart of Chicago. This story teaches us that sometimes light comes from the darkest places, and redemption can wear the face of the man the whole world calls a devil. Vivian stepped into Marco's world, not because she wanted to, but because circumstance pushed her there. But she chose to stay because she discovered her own value through that man's eyes. Life does not always give us perfect choices, but it is in the hardest choices that we find our true strength. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you do not miss the most compelling stories every day. Do not forget to like and share this video with the people you love. How do you feel about Vivian and Marco's story? In real life, have you ever stood before difficult choices and found strength from somewhere you did not expect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear the stories from deep in your heart. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the story.